I bought that luxury home with every penny I had saved in my lifetime, only to be kicked out by my own son and daughter-in-law on housewarming day. They called me a burden. They locked my accounts, watched me like a criminal. But what they didn't know is that I recorded everything, and at that concert I blew the truth wide open in front of everyone. If you think this is just another family story, you're dead wrong. Hit that subscribe button now so you won't miss the next jaw-dropping story from us. The morning fog curled like whispers around the crooked picket fence of the old cottage, perched high above the sleepy mountain town of Glen Ridge. The air smelled of pine and memory. Inside, the dim light filtered through thin lace curtains, landing softly on an upright piano, whose ivory keys had seen decades of joy, grief, and quiet resilience. Eleanor Quinn sat hunched on the piano bench, her fingers hovering just above the keys. At 72, her spine was a little bent, her hair a silver crown of soft waves tied in a loose bun. She wore a cardigan 2 sizes too big and house slippers that had molded perfectly to her feet over the years. Outside, the wind rustled the tall grass. Inside, the silence waited. She exhaled deeply, let her fingers fall. The melody rose slowly, an old waltz she used to play for her husband back when they were newlyweds, living in a studio apartment with nothing but music and dreams. Her hands trembled only slightly as she moved across the keys. The notes weren't perfect, but they were honest, and the piano, old as it was, still spoke with grace. On top of the piano sat a dusty wooden frame. Inside, a faded photograph of a smiling young man in uniform, Benjamin Quinn, her Ben, killed in a highway accident 30 years ago. Eleanor had never remarried. She'd poured every ounce of herself into raising their only son, Henry. She looked at Ben's picture now, mid-song, and smiled sadly. "It's colder this morning," she whispered, "but the pine trees haven't lost their fire. You'd like the way the mist rolls in over the hills still looks like it did in 75. The song came to a soft end. She rested her fingers on the keys, listening to the silence, then slowly stood up, her knees aching as usual. She made her way to the small writing desk by the window and pulled out a piece of stationery. The paper had little pink flowers in the corners, something she'd bought years ago for no reason, but never used. She uncapped her pen and began to write in neat cursive. "Dear Lily, I saw a red cardinal on the windowsill this morning. Do you remember when we used to pretend they were signs from your grandfather? I think he's still watching over us. I hope school is treating you kindly and that you're still practicing your scales." She paused, tapped the pen gently against her chin, then continued. "I miss you. The house is quieter than usual, and the heater makes that same groaning sound you always complained about. I might have it looked at someday. Love, Grandma Ellie." She folded the letter carefully and slipped it into an envelope. Then she placed it beside the old rotary phone where it would wait until her weekly trip into town. Eleanor didn't believe in email. She believed in ink and paper and waiting. From the kitchen, the kettle began to whistle. She moved with practiced slowness, pouring the water into a chipped porcelain teacup. Her breakfast was simple: 2 pieces of toast, some raspberry jam, and a boiled egg. As she sat down at the tiny round table, the floorboards creaked familiar sounds in a house that knew her better than any human ever could. She was halfway through her tea when the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel made her still. Her heart jumped. No one ever came this early. No one came at all most days. She shuffled toward the window and parted the curtain with 2 fingers. A sleek black SUV was pulling into her driveway, the kind of car that didn't belong in Glen Ridge. A second later, the engine cut off and 2 figures stepped out, Henry and Rebecca. Eleanor blinked hard, unsure if she was seeing things. Her son had always preferred calling. He hadn't set foot in this house for nearly 5 years. "Ben," she murmured softly, looking up toward the ceiling. "Are you watching this?" The knock on the door came quick and firm. She didn't rush. Let them wait a minute. Let them remember whose door they were standing at. Still, her hands were trembling by the time she opened it. "Mom," Henry said with that tight-lipped smile he always wore when he needed something. "Hello, Mother Quinn." Rebecca chimed in with rehearsed cheer, her lipstick perfect, her eyes scanning the living room behind Eleanor as if already taking inventory. "Well," Eleanor said, folding her arms, "this is a surprise." Henry leaned in and gave her a half hug that barely touched her shoulders. "You look good, Mom. You look expensive," she replied, eyeing his tailored coat and Italian leather shoes. Rebecca laughed politely, brushing non-existent dust from her blazer. "We were passing through. Thought we'd come say hi." "You drove 4 hours through the mountains to say hi?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Henry cleared his throat. "Can we come in?" She stepped aside without answering. Let the silence speak for her. Inside, they looked absurd, like corporate sharks dropped into a pastoral painting. Rebecca perched on the edge of the armchair, as if it might stain her suit. Henry paced a little, inspecting family photos like exhibits in a museum. "This place hasn't changed at all," he muttered. "Neither have you," Eleanor replied, taking her seat by the window. He turned to her, hands clasped. "Look, Mom, I won't beat around the bush. We've been thinking. This house, it's charming, really, but it's also a liability. It's old, isolated, and God forbid something happened to you out here. Who would know?" Eleanor said nothing, watching him over her teacup. Rebecca jumped in. "We found this beautiful place outside Asheville. Gated community, full amenities 20 minutes from Lily's school. You'd have your own sweet sunlight security space." "I have space," Eleanor said. "You'd be with us," Henry added. "A real family. No more of this isolation." Eleanor looked past them at the mantel where Ben's photo still stood. "This isolation is where I raised you. It's where your daughter took her first steps. It's where your father died." Silence. Rebecca adjusted her sleeve. "We know how much this house means to you, but do you?" Eleanor cut in sharply. "Do you know what this piano cost me? Do you know what it's like to patch roof shingles in the middle of December because your son is too busy to answer a call?" Henry's jaw clenched. "Mom, this isn't an attack. We just want what's best for you." "No," she said slowly. "You want what's best for you." Henry stiffened. Rebecca leaned forward. "Ellie, listen. That ridge your house sits on, it's being rezoned. Tourist developers are lining up to build chalets and eco-lodges. If you sell now, you could get 3 times its worth." Eleanor narrowed her eyes. "So that's it. It's a win-win," Henry insisted. "You move closer to us, get a modern home, and you walk away with a comfortable retirement." "I already have a comfortable retirement," she said coldly. "I have jam sunlight and Bach in the mornings." "Lily misses you," Rebecca added, playing her final card. "She'd love to see you more. Think of her future." That one hit. Eleanor looked down at her hands, twisted and aged, and remembered Lily's tiny fingers wrapped around hers while they played Twinkle Twinkle on the piano. "I do think of her," Eleanor said quietly. "Every day. That's why I won't let her see me give away her history for a driveway and marble countertops." Henry sighed, ran a hand through his hair. "You're being stubborn." "I'm being awake." "Mom, at least consider it." Eleanor stood, slowly walked over to the piano and pressed a single key, middle C. The sound rang through the room like a verdict. "I'll think about it," she lied. Rebecca smiled, sensing victory. Henry nodded. "That's all we ask." As they gathered their coats, Eleanor walked them to the door. Before stepping out, Henry turned to her and said, "We'll call you in a few days, maybe come back up with the paperwork." Eleanor nodded. "Of course." They drove off into the mist as quickly as they came. Once the hum of the engine faded, Eleanor turned back to her empty house. Her tea was cold. The letter to Lily still sat on the table. She picked it up, stared at it, then crumpled it in her hand. This wasn't over, and Benjamin, wherever he was, would just have to forgive her for what came next. The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall pine trees surrounding the hilltop cottage, painting long amber shadows across the porch. The smell of pine resin clung to the breeze, and far below, Glenridge stretched out in sleepy silence. Eleanor Quinn stood by the window, peering through the glass with anticipation, her hands twisted in front of her, restless as her eyes flicked toward the winding gravel road. Then she saw it, a red bicycle wobbling gently as it crested the hill, a burst of auburn hair beneath a yellow helmet. Her heart surged. "Lily," she whispered with a smile. The bicycle skidded slightly as it hit the driveway, and Lily Quinn, 16, freckled and fire-hearted, hopped off, throwing her helmet into the wicker basket strapped to the front. She bounded up the steps 2 at a time. Eleanor opened the door just as Lily raised her fist to knock. "You're early," Eleanor said, mock scolding. "I pedaled faster," Lily said, breathless, pulling her grandmother into a hug. "It smells like pine and cinnamon in here. I was baking, your favorite. Apple spice muffins. One's already got your name on it." They laughed together as Eleanor guided her inside. The familiar aroma of cinnamon and sugar welcomed Lily like a memory, and as she sank into the worn couch, the tension in her limbs seemed to melt away. Eleanor moved to the kitchen and returned with 2 plates, steam still curling from the pastries. "You remembered the glaze," Lily said, eyes wide. "I never forget a recipe or a granddaughter's preferences." They ate in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that comes only between people who know each other deeply. Then Lily set her plate down and looked toward the piano. "Can we?" she asked, her voice soft but hopeful. Eleanor didn't speak. She simply rose, walked over, and lifted the lid. The first time Lily touched those keys, she was barely 3, clambering into Eleanor's lap and pressing random notes like secret buttons. Now she sat on the bench with confidence, stretching her fingers like a seasoned pianist. They played Claire de Lune, Eleanor, taking the lower register, Lily the high. Their hands moved in harmony, the music filling every corner of the small house. Outside, the pines swayed, and the light continued its slow descent. As the last note faded, Lily leaned her head against her grandmother's shoulder. "I wish I could stay here forever." Eleanor pressed her lips to the crown of Lily's head. "I wish that too." There was a knock at the door, hard, impatient. Eleanor flinched slightly, and Lily looked up. "That'll be your father," Eleanor said, her voice tight. Henry stepped in without waiting. Rebecca followed behind him, sunglasses pushed up on her head like a crown. "Lily," he said, surprised. "You didn't say you were coming here today." "I didn't think I had to," Lily replied, not moving from the piano bench. Henry's jaw tightened. "We talked about boundaries." Rebecca placed a manicured hand on his arm. "Let's not start something. We're here to talk to your mother." Eleanor folded her arms. "You already talked. What more is there to say?" Henry gestured for calm. "Look, Mom, we did some digging. The entire ridge, your property, the surrounding lots, it's being evaluated for a high-end eco-resort. Hiking trails, spa cabins, the works. The county's already laid the groundwork." Rebecca stepped in. "Developers are offering triple the current value. We're talking legacy money. Think about Lily's college, your healthcare, a fresh start." "I have healthcare," Eleanor replied coolly. "And Lily's already getting scholarships," Lily added. Henry ignored them both. "You've been here 40 years. I get it. But this house is falling apart. The wiring's ancient, the well system barely passes inspection. One strong winter and I'll rebuild it like I've done every year since Ben died." Eleanor snapped. "You think I'm weak, Henry? You think I can't manage because I have silver hair and fewer teeth?" Rebecca raised her hands. "No one is calling you weak, Ellie. But there's an easier way, a safer way. You could live in comfort near us, near Lily. No more isolation." Eleanor turned to her granddaughter. "Do you want that? For me to move in with you and your parents?" Lily hesitated. "I want to see you more, but not if it makes you sad." Eleanor smiled softly. That girl had always known how to cut through noise to the core of things. "Then let's do this," Henry said quickly, sensing the moment. "We'll get a valuation. Just see what the market says. No commitment." "I said I'll think about it," Eleanor muttered. "That's all." Rebecca's smile was immediate, sugary. "That's all we ask." As they left, Lily lingered, glancing over her shoulder. "I'll come by tomorrow," she whispered. "Finish the Chopin." Eleanor nodded, her heart too full to speak. That night, sleep eluded her. The house creaked around her like an old friend with troubled dreams. She stood barefoot by the window, gazing at the moonlight as it bathed the pine trees in silver. The wind whispered secrets through the needles. She thought of Lily, of the future, of the weight of silence that grew heavier each winter. The next morning she walked to the edge of the property where the largest pine tree stood, a place Ben used to sit under on summer evenings, strumming his guitar, Lily curled at his feet. She stood there for a long time, tracing the carvings etched into the bark, E+B 1978. She placed her palm against it and closed her eyes. "I'm sorry, Ben," she whispered, "but I think I have to let go." That afternoon she called Henry. "Bring the papers," she said. 2 days later, everything moved quickly. Valuators came, documents were drafted. Eleanor signed them with a shaky hand, watching the ink spread across the page like a crack in old glass. Then came the final day. Lily helped her pack. They wrapped porcelain and newspaper-folded quilts into boxes, disassembled bookshelves. "Feels weird," Lily said as she cradled a photo of her as a toddler sitting on Eleanor's lap at the piano. "It is weird," Eleanor replied, tying string around a bundle of letters. "And a little heartbreaking. You don't have to do this for me," Lily said suddenly. "If this is about me," Eleanor cupped her granddaughter's face, "this is about us." When the moving truck arrived, Eleanor stood in the doorway and looked around one last time. The walls were bare. The piano had been carefully covered and wheeled out earlier, bound for the new house. She walked through each room slowly, like saying goodbye to an old friend. She paused at the mantel, kissed her fingers, and pressed them to Ben's picture. Then she stepped outside. The sun was beginning to set, turning the sky a dusky rose. The pines shimmered in the light. Eleanor and Lily walked down to the pine tree together. Eleanor carried a small music box. She knelt, buried it gently beneath the roots, and covered it with soil. "What was that?" Lily asked. "A promise," Eleanor said softly. "To who?" "To myself." She stood, brushed off her hands, and took one last look at the only home she'd ever truly known. Then she turned, took Lily's hand, and walked away. The morning Eleanor Quinn moved into the estate on Halston Ridge. The sky was clean and blue, and a line of trimmed cypress trees stood like guards along the circular driveway. The house loomed above her sleek, glass-heavy, all-sharp edges and angular beauty. It was the kind of home that made the covers of luxury magazines, the kind of place that whispered exclusivity and perfection. She stood beneath the arched stone entryway while two uniformed movers unloaded the last box from the van. Somewhere inside, her son Henry and his wife Rebecca were arguing about curtain colors and floor wax. Their voices bounced off the polished marble like clinking glass. "You'll love it here, Mom," Henry had said just 2 days earlier. "Plenty of space, no more fixing pipes or chasing mice. You just rest now, we'll handle everything." And for a moment Eleanor believed him. That first day felt like a courtesy visit to a high-end hotel. Her bedroom, located on the second floor at the farthest end of the hallway, had been outfitted with a queen-sized bed with a cooling gel mattress, a massage chair, and blackout curtains that rolled down automatically. Everything smelled of new leather eucalyptus and engineered perfection. Rebecca even placed a little vase of lilies by her bedside, though Eleanor suspected it had been the maid's doing. Tired from the move, she spent most of the day sitting in the breakfast nook with a view of the fountain courtyard, sipping chamomile tea and watching landscapers in identical uniforms trim hedges down to exact geometry. That night she lay in bed trying to find the familiar sound of creaking floorboards or a gusty draft slipping under the window. There were none, only silence and walls too thick to let life in. The shift came subtly like rain before a storm. On the third morning, Rebecca brought in a tray of toast and yogurt, her lipstick perfectly applied at 7 a.m. "Morning, Eleanor," she said, placing the tray down. "Henry thought it'd be good to get a few of your things digitized, for safekeeping. If you give me the passcode to your phone and bank app, I can help organize everything. No rush, whenever you're ready." Eleanor didn't answer right away. She stared at the toast cut into triangles, no butter. "You want my bank password?" she asked softly. "Just to streamline everything," Rebecca said breezily. "Your family. And besides, these apps can be tricky at your age." "At your age." Eleanor felt the air thicken, but she smiled. "I'll think about it." She didn't give the password that day, or the next. But by the end of the week, Henry came in personally, documents in hand. "Mom, we're trying to make your life easier," he said gently. "You've always been so responsible. But if something happens, we need to be able to step in. For Lily, for everyone." It was when he mentioned Lily that Eleanor felt herself soften. She gave them the passcode. By Sunday, Rebecca had also taken her Medicare information to simplify renewals, and a folder of Eleanor's important papers had been moved from her suitcase to a locked drawer in Henry's office. "I'll keep it safe," he assured her. It wasn't just the paperwork. Her medication, 2 pills for blood pressure, 1 for cholesterol, was suddenly handed to her each day on a tray, counted, poured into a tiny glass cup. No more storing bottles in her bedside drawer. Rebecca said it was to avoid mix-ups. Her phone began disappearing at night, charging downstairs according to Henry. She found herself having to ask if she could call Lily. And when Lily did visit on Wednesdays after school and Saturdays for lunch, someone was always there, watching, either Henry himself or Rebecca, or even the overly polite housekeeper named Madeline, who lingered just within earshot. Conversations that once flowed like rivers now became still ponds, shallow and observed. The final straw came 2 weeks later. Eleanor awoke early, eager to take a walk through the neighborhood before the sun got too high. She slipped on a cardigan, tiptoed down the stairs, and was just unlatching the front door when Rebecca's voice sliced through the quiet like a razor. "Eleanor, where are you going?" Eleanor turned slowly for a walk. Rebecca walked barefoot across the marble robe wrapped tight. "You can't just go wandering, not without someone with you. What if you fall? What if you get lost?" "I'm not 90, Eleanor replied calmly. "But you're not 30 either." That night she stood at her bedroom window and stared out into the dark. The curtains had no pull string, only a remote that Rebecca kept downstairs. The windows themselves didn't open. Everything was central, automated, and locked. It occurred to her suddenly, horrifically, that she didn't even have a key to her own room. She pressed her palm to the glass, cool, unyielding. A single sentence flashed across her mind as sharp and undeniable as thunder. "I'm a guest in a prison built for me by my own child." One morning, Lily came upstairs after school, breathless and glowing. "I snuck you a chocolate croissant," she whispered, pulling the pastry from her backpack. Eleanor smiled, but it was brittle around the edges. "Thank you, sweetheart." They sat on the edge of the bed and talked in hushed tones. Lily showed her sketches from art class. They whispered about music. But before long, Rebecca called from downstairs. "Lily, it's time for your lesson." Lily sighed. "Can't we just—" "No," Eleanor said gently. "Go on. I'll be here." As Lily stood, Eleanor reached for her hand. "You know I love you, right?" "I know," Lily said. "But are you okay here?" The question stunned Eleanor. The girl saw more than anyone gave her credit for. "I'm fine," Eleanor lied. "Because Dad says you're forgetful, that you almost overdosed on your meds once." Eleanor blinked. "What?" "He said that's why they have to help you now, so nothing bad happens." The lie sat between them like a wolf in the room. "Don't believe everything people say, Lily." Lily nodded slowly. "I don't." That night, Eleanor stared at the digital clock glowing beside her bed. 3:18 a.m. Her body ached for air, for freedom, for something more than silence and floral-scented artificial peace. She stood padded barefoot to the piano in the corner of the hallway where her beloved instrument now sat. It looked absurd in its pristine corner, too clean, too silent. She lifted the lid and pressed a single note. The sound was soft, hollow, like it had been swallowed. She closed the lid again and walked back to bed. Weeks passed. She became a ghost who smiled on cue, ate what was given, and spoke when spoken to. The only time her eyes lit up was when Lily visited. But even then, the moments were too short, too filtered through Rebecca's watchful eye or Henry's thin politeness. The house was beautiful, yes, but Eleanor began to dream in shades of gray. Her thoughts grew tighter, pressed against the walls. Time no longer moved in days, but in the spaces between footsteps outside her door. She wrote a letter to herself and hid it under her mattress. "I am still here. I am not crazy. I am not old in the way they say I am. I remember my name. I remember my music. I remember freedom. This house is not my home, and this story is not over." The next morning she brewed her own cup of tea, ignoring the prepared tray waiting on the dresser. She stared at her reflection in the mirror above the vanity. The lines on her face were deep, yes, but her eyes, they were sharper than ever. She was not done, not by a long shot. The house was asleep. It was the kind of stillness that didn't just feel quiet, it felt intentional, engineered, like someone had designed the silence to be absolute. Eleanor Quinn lay on her bed fully dressed in a soft cardigan and slacks, her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The blue LED clock on the dresser read 2:13 a.m. She hadn't slept in 2 nights. Too many pieces weren't adding up, the medication being handed to her without labels, the missing letters in her drawer, the unspoken surveillance of every phone call, and now Henry's strange avoidance. He barely spoke to her unless prompted. Rebecca, once cheerfully false, now smiled only with her mouth. Something had changed, and Eleanor's instincts, honed through 72 years of motherhood, widowhood, and survival, were screaming. She sat up quietly, her bare feet touching the cold floor. She didn't reach for the light, didn't make a sound. Instead, she moved toward the door, cracked it slightly. Voices, muffled but insistent. She inched down the hallway, each step placed with careful precision. At the top of the staircase, she stopped. The light from Henry's office glowed faintly below. She sat on the top stair, listening through the banister. Rebecca's voice was unmistakable, low-sharp. "She's already signed the sale paperwork. Now we just need to make the inheritance look tidy." A man's voice replied, measured and oily. "But the signature on the new will, it's clearly not hers. If this ever gets audited, you're looking at criminal exposure. Who's going to audit an old woman who thinks it's still 1983? Rebecca scoffed. Eleanor's spine straightened. "We've cut her off from everything. She thinks Lily visits more than she does. Her phone's been monitored for weeks. Trust me, by the time the notary sees that page, it'll look like she forgot she even signed it." The lawyer hesitated. "You better hope she doesn't talk to anyone. Or worse, someone talks to her." "She barely remembers what day it is," Rebecca said flatly. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. In that moment, something inside her broke, and something else, something older, something steel-hard, took its place. She turned, padded silently back to her room, and closed the door with a soft click. Her reflection in the darkened vanity mirror stared back at her hollow-eyed, white-haired, wrapped in a cardigan too loose for her thinning frame. But she was not weak. She was not gone. And now she had proof. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring into the dark, her hands curled into fists in her lap. If they wanted her to forget, she would pretend. Let the game begin. The next morning, Eleanor shuffled slowly into the kitchen, where Rebecca was arranging blueberries on top of a yogurt parfait like it was an Instagram photo shoot. "Good morning, Eleanor," Rebecca chirped. "You're up early." Eleanor smiled vacantly. "I was looking for Ben. He said we had a picnic this morning." Rebecca froze. Eleanor turned toward the hallway, faking distraction. "Has he already left for the war?" Rebecca cleared her throat. Ben's not here, remember? He passed a long time ago, Eleanor." "Oh," Eleanor replied, blinking. "Silly me. What day is it?" "Thursday." "I thought it was Tuesday." She laughed softly, then turned back to the hallway. "I should get dressed for church." Rebecca's eyes narrowed, but her mouth pulled into a gentle smile. "Don't worry about anything. Just rest today." Eleanor nodded absently, already pretending not to remember the conversation. For the next few days, Eleanor performed her role flawlessly. She forgot the names of Rebecca's co-workers at a brunch. She asked twice whether she was still living in Glen Ridge. She even wandered out onto the back patio barefoot, mumbling about her old rose bushes. Behind closed doors, however, she was building a plan. She needed an ally. Someone from the old world. Someone who remembered her before Henry and Rebecca had sanded her life into something sterile and inoffensive. The first name that came to her mind was Malcolm Tate. Mr. Tate had lived next door to her for 17 years, a retired history teacher and a widower like herself, reserved, thoughtful. Someone who had once returned a pie dish with a handwritten note and a sprig of rosemary. She hadn't spoken to him in nearly a year, not since she left her hilltop home. But maybe, just maybe, she waited for the right opportunity. One afternoon, while Rebecca was at a gallery event and Henry was in meetings, Eleanor asked the maid Madeline to help her take a walk around the block for fresh air. Madeline, bored and on her phone, agreed without hesitation. The moment they passed the black wrought-iron gate and rounded the corner, Eleanor quickened her pace, heart racing beneath her pale blouse. Malcolm's house appeared like a warm memory at the end of the lane. Modest, old-fashioned, with wildflowers blooming in crooked pots by the windows. She rang the bell, then knocked hard. The door opened, and there he was. Gray-haired, bespectacled, wearing a cardigan and holding a paperback book. "Eleanor," he said, stunned. "Malcolm," she whispered, "I need your help." He stepped aside immediately. They sat in his small living room, surrounded by books and faded photographs. Eleanor recounted everything. The silence, the pills, the restricted calls, the signature she never gave. Malcolm listened, brow furrowed, nodding occasionally, but never interrupting. When she finished, he said simply, "They're trying to declare you incompetent." "I know," she said, her voice trembling. They think if they gaslight me long enough I'll believe I'm senile, then they'll have it all. You have any physical proof? I heard them. I can't prove it yet, but I know it. Malcolm walked over to a small desk drawer and pulled out a recording pen. Take this. Looks like a pen, but it records high-quality audio. Just flip the cap. Eleanor took it with both hands as if it were a sacred relic. He sat back down. You need to document everything. Conversations, interactions, especially anything that shows they're manipulating or controlling your behavior. Eleanor nodded, fire returning to her eyes. What if they find it? Don't let them. They looked at each other, then not as neighbors, not as acquaintances, but as co-conspirators in a silent rebellion. Malcolm leaned forward, and Eleanor, yes, don't let them take your music. That's your proof, too. She swallowed hard. I won't. Back at the house, she hid the pen inside her Bible on the bedside table. The irony wasn't lost on her. That night, Henry stopped by her room. Hey, Mom. I was thinking maybe we should have Dr. Kellerman come by for a check-in, just to be proactive. Eleanor blinked. Dr. Kellerman. My old physician. No. Someone new. A specialist. He works with seniors. Real gentle. He's helped a lot of families with planning. She looked at him, expression blank. Will he bring cookies? Henry chuckled. Maybe. You're funny today. Am I? She asked. He left after 15 minutes of small talk. As soon as the door clicked shut, Eleanor reached for the pen. It had recorded everything. She slept with a small smile on her face for the first time in weeks. Over the next 3 days, Eleanor compiled hours of recordings, casual remarks from Rebecca about redirecting her mother-in-law's funds, Henry's flippant comments about adjusting Mom's will, and even snippets from house staff complaining about how the old lady still won't let go of that piano. She met with Malcolm every other morning under the guise of sunlight walks. They exchanged recordings, discussed options. He offered to put her in touch with a legal contact he trusted, someone quiet but deadly in court. We'll need a trigger moment, Malcolm said one day over coffee. Something public, something that forces them to reveal their hand. Eleanor looked up from her cup. I have just the idea. The morning air was crisp when Eleanor Quinn dialed the old number from memory, her fingers trembling not with age, but with adrenaline. The phone she used wasn't hers. It was a prepaid burner Malcolm had purchased from a gas station 2 towns over, slid discreetly into her cardigan pocket 3 days prior. She only turned it on in the garden near the back hedges where the signal was weak, but surveillance was weaker. Branley and Holt Notary, this is Kim speaking. Kim, it's Eleanor Quinn. A brief silence, then warmth. Mrs. Quinn. Oh my goodness, it's been so long. How are you? I'm fine, Kim. Listen, I need your help. Of course, anything. Do you still have my will on file, the one I updated in 2017? There was another pause, this one tinged with concern. Yes, I believe so. We don't purge unless requested. Just a second, let me check the digital vault. Eleanor held her breath, glancing over her shoulder at the Manor's looming windows. Curtains drawn. Silent. Found it. Dated March 15th, 2017. Still signed, notarized, and logged. Would you like a copy? I would. Paper copy. Do not email. Mail it to Malcolm Tate's residence. You remember him? Of course. Use a plain envelope. No return address. Kim hesitated. Is everything okay, Mrs. Quinn? Eleanor forced a smile into her voice. Let's just say the wind's changed, and I need to remember where I stand. 3 days later, the envelope arrived. Malcolm met her at their usual bench by the duck pond, a quiet stretch in a neglected part of town that neither Henry nor Rebecca would ever think to visit. He handed her the envelope tucked inside a library book. She accepted it wordlessly and slipped it into her handbag, which now always held her recording pen and a second notebook labeled grocery lists. Back in her room, she shut the door, drew the blackout curtains, and locked herself in the bathroom. She knelt on the tiles like a woman praying for absolution and tore the envelope open with shaking fingers. There it was, her original will, stamped, sealed, her own signature unmistakable scrawled across the bottom of the second page. All of her estate, everything, her Glenridge property, her stocks, her pension, even the royalties from her late husband's war memoir left not to Henry, not to Rebecca, but to Lily Quinn. The paper smelled faintly of toner and dust. Eleanor held it against her chest and closed her eyes. Not for sentiment, but for strategy. She now had the blueprint, the proof. She wasn't imagining the theft. They were stealing her life while smiling through it, and she was done playing the polite guest in their heist. 2 nights later, Eleanor was searching the storage ottoman at the foot of her bed, looking for a receipt to complete her senior confusion act when her fingers brushed against something hard. She stopped. It wasn't the dusty fleece blanket she expected. It was wooden. She reached deeper, pulled it out. Her breath caught. A music box. Oak hand-carved with faded gold trim and a tiny copper latch. She hadn't seen it in over a decade. It had belonged to her grandmother, and inside she had once hidden. Her heart pounded. She snapped the lid open. There, beneath the velvet lining wrapped in yellowing tissue, lay a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it slowly. It was a hand-signed, notarized copy of her 2017 will, her original. She had hidden it before Henry's last surprise visit to the Glenridge house, afraid even then that something might happen. And she'd forgotten it ever existed. Tears stung her eyes. Not from sadness, but from the sheer irony that her own paranoia, once dismissed as eccentricity, had now become prophecy. That afternoon, Lily dropped by after school. They sat by the window in Eleanor's room drinking peppermint tea and pretending the rest of the house didn't exist. "I found something," Eleanor said quietly. Lily looked up. "A music box," she added. "Do you remember the one with the ballerina inside?" Lily's eyes lit up. "The one that played Moon River, that used to sit on the piano. That's the one. I thought Dad threw it away." Eleanor smiled faintly. He didn't, or maybe he just forgot about it. She reached into her drawer and pulled it out. Lily cradled it in her hands. "There's something inside," Eleanor whispered. "Lift the lining." Lily looked confused, but did as told. Her fingers froze when she saw the folded paper. "What is this?" "My will." "Wait, the real one? The only one that matters?" Lily stared at her. "But Dad said—" "I know what he said." They sat in silence. Then Lily whispered, "What are you going to do?" Eleanor reached over and touched her hand. "Protect the truth. And protect you." From that day forward, Eleanor became a ghost in her own house, but not a passive one. She was quiet, invisible, and utterly watchful. Every morning she clipped the recording pen to the inside of her cardigan. She kept it running during meals, during idle hallway chats, even during her check-ins with Henry, which had become more frequent and increasingly patronizing. "You're doing so well, Mom," he'd say while checking his Apple Watch. "Dr. Kellerman's coming next week. Just a cognitive refresh. Nothing big." Eleanor would nod, feign confusion, ask about what year it was. All while the pen recorded. She kept a log in the margins of her crossword puzzle books, symbols only she could decipher. Meant Rebecca slipped and said too much. Meant Henry tried to corner her about money. Meant another mention of transition planning. Within a week she had 4 hours of audio and 3 direct contradictions to their claims. On Tuesday, Rebecca barged into her room, her smile visibly strained. "Hey, Eleanor. Just a quick thing. Have you been talking to Lily about any family documents?" Eleanor blinked innocently. "You mean the photo albums?" Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "No, more like legal stuff." Eleanor tilted her head. "Like parking tickets?" Rebecca laughed too loudly. No, just wondering." She backed out of the room, but Eleanor saw at the first crack. The flicker of real concern. Rebecca knew, and now so did Eleanor. That night, Eleanor transferred her audio files to Malcolm's laptop, using the cord he'd given her. He was already compiling a timeline and had reached out to a legal contact discreetly. "They're not just cornering you," he said. "They're building a narrative. The doctor they want to bring in. He's not an objective evaluator. He's been involved in several conservatorship cases, mostly for families looking to take control of elder assets." "Can we stop it?" Eleanor asked. "If we strike first," Malcolm replied. "With evidence, with a plan." She nodded slowly. "It's time," she said, "to play their game, but with my rules." The next morning, Eleanor dressed with care. She chose a lavender blouse, pearl earrings, and a touch of lipstick, the kind Ben used to call evening garden. As she passed Rebecca in the hallway, she smiled sweetly. "Lovely day, isn't it?" Rebecca stiffened. "Yes, beautiful." Eleanor leaned closer, almost conspiratorially. "Did you know lilies bloom best when no one's watching?" Rebecca blinked. "Excuse me?" But Eleanor was already gone, her steps soft and deliberate as the music box's tune echoed faintly behind her. Moon River wider than a mile. The morning sun stretched thin golden light across the polished floors of the Halston Ridge estate. But inside the house, the air was anything but warm. Tension had settled in like humidity dense, clinging, impossible to ignore. Eleanor Quinn stood at the kitchen island, the burner phone in her hand, pressing it carefully to her ear as she murmured, "Yes, Mr. Landon, I have the documents. I'll bring them to your office myself. No couriers. It needs to be face-to-face." She didn't hear the footsteps until it was too late. Rebecca's voice exploded behind her. "Who are you talking to?" The phone slipped from Eleanor's hand, clattering onto the marble countertop. She turned slowly. Rebecca stood there barefoot in her silk robe, eyes bloodshot rage flooding every inch of her perfectly curated persona. "A lawyer. You've been calling a lawyer." Eleanor didn't flinch. "Yes." "You manipulative old woman," Rebecca hissed. "After everything we've done for you, after the care, the planning, you're going to ruin it all because of some spite." "It's not spite," Eleanor said, her voice cool. "It's self-defense." Henry appeared in the doorway, disheveled, blinking as if he had just woken into a nightmare. He said nothing. Rebecca turned on him, jabbing a finger. You knew she was planning something and you didn't stop her." Henry opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Rebecca advanced on Eleanor now. "You are a relic, a weight around everyone's neck, a roadblock to the future. You think clinging to your little piano and dusty documents gives you power." "I think truth gives me power," Eleanor replied. Rebecca laughed bitterly. "You can't even remember your own medications half the time." "I remember enough to know you forged my signature." Rebecca's hand slammed the kitchen counter. "You senile witch!" "Stop," Henry said weakly, but it was drowned in the fury of the moment. "You're going to be declared mentally unfit," Rebecca roared. "You hear me? You want a lawyer up. Fine, I'll file first. Conservatorship, psychological evaluation. You'll be lucky if you get visitation rights to your own name." Eleanor didn't move. "You want war," she said. "You've got it." Then with quiet finality she walked away. Past her son, who still hadn't looked her in the eye. Past the photographs on the hallway wall, edited versions of a family that had once been whole. Past the expensive curtains and furniture that looked like they belonged in someone else's life. She climbed the stairs one slow step at a time. She packed a single suitcase, and at 8:47 a.m. Eleanor Quinn left the estate. No chauffeur, no goodbyes. Only the hush of morning wind as she stepped into the cab Malcolm had called for her. The door of Malcolm Tate's small cottage creaked open with a sound that felt like safety. The old wooden floor groaned in welcome beneath Eleanor's shoes. "I made tea," Malcolm said, ushering her in, "and I cleared the guest room. Don't worry, it still smells like old books and mothballs." "Perfect," Eleanor said. He took her coat and suitcase, placing them gently beside the couch. She looked around the modest home, frayed rug, soft lighting walls lined with novels and musical scores. A sharp contrast to the marble sterility she had left behind. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" "For bringing all this to your door." Malcolm smiled. "You forget I'm a retired history teacher. I live for drama rooted in betrayal and revolution." She laughed, but it caught in her throat, turning into a cough. He handed her a warm mug, chamomile, with honey. She sat down, letting the tea warm her fingers, her breath, her bones. For a moment there was peace. Then her phone buzzed. Her real one, Rebecca, must have realized she hadn't taken it and sent a message through Malcolm's emergency contact form. Eleanor opened the message and read aloud. "If you don't return voluntarily, we will file an emergency petition to have you evaluated. Your behavior has become erratic and unstable. You are not safe on your own." She stared at the screen, then set it down. "They're going to use my escape as proof," she whispered. "They're bluffing," Malcolm replied, sitting beside her. "You've done nothing erratic. You made a lawful move. You're with a friend. They'd need actual evidence of mental instability. They'll fabricate it if they have to. Then we strike first." That afternoon, Malcolm drove her to Landon & Shear Attorneys at Law, a small but highly respected firm tucked behind a bookstore downtown. Eleanor wore her best navy coat, a scarf pinned with her late husband's antique music note brooch. Mr. Landon met them personally, his handshake firm. They laid out the original will, the music box, the notarized copies, and the USB drive containing hours of incriminating recordings. Landon listened, took notes, and finally looked up from his legal pad. "This is not a civil dispute," he said. "This is fraud, coercion, elder abuse, and conspiracy." Eleanor met his gaze. "Will I win?" "You already have," he said. "Now we make it legal." The next day, the petition was filed in county court. A motion to validate the 2017 will rescind all forged documents and preemptively block any conservatorship petition citing mental incompetence. Malcolm submitted a sworn affidavit of Eleanor's mental acuity. Lily, brave and trembling, added her own statement. A tear-streaked voice memo detailing how her father and stepmother had kept her grandmother isolated and confused. It was raw, powerful, and enough. Back at the cottage, Eleanor moved carefully. Her body still ached from years of quiet tension, but her spirit felt sharper with each sunrise. She slept in a twin bed with a quilt that smelled of cedar and lemon balm. She played piano again. Malcolm's upright Baldwin was out of tune but charming, and she wrote. Not memoirs, not complaints. Plans. On the fourth night, Malcolm entered the living room with a box in his hands. "Thought this might help you focus," he said. Inside were her old journals, letters from Ben, and 2 newspaper clippings. One of her Glen Ridge retirement concert, the other from her late husband's book tour. "I kept them," he said. "I don't know why. Maybe I was waiting for you to remember who you were." "I never forgot," she said. "I was just silenced." He sat beside her. "Then speak louder." A week after her departure, Eleanor received an official envelope with the Quinn family crest embossed in gold. Inside, a cease and desist notice from Rebecca's attorney. It accused her of slander, mental instability, and willful abandonment of family agreements. She folded it neatly, placed it in the fireplace, and watched it burn. Later that evening, Lily visited the cottage for the first time. She stepped through the door like someone entering a church. "This place smells like cinnamon and truth," she said. "It's home," Eleanor replied. They played piano, ate scones, and in the quiet of the night, Eleanor looked out the window and whispered to herself, "I left quietly, but I didn't leave defeated." The idea came to Eleanor Quinn in a quiet flash as she was watching the rain trace lazy lines down the cottage window. Malcolm was in the kitchen humming tunelessly while slicing oranges, the soft rhythm of the knife against the cutting board, the only sound in the room. The radio was off. The fire was low. "We need to play," she said suddenly. Malcolm turned. "Play. A concert, a performance, a declaration." He set the knife down. "You want to perform?" "No," she replied, turning to face him fully. "I want to reclaim." He waited. "I want to host a concert, a charity recital, something public, big enough to stir dust. Call it the Free Piano." "No. Call it the Symphony of Freedom. Or better, the Black and White Symphony." Her fingers fluttered in the air as though keys lay beneath them. Notes in rebellion, music that speaks what I couldn't. Malcolm blinked once, then smiled. "You're serious." "Deadly." He set the oranges aside and nodded. "Then let's begin." They worked out of the sunroom, the one with the rusted typewriter, and a whiteboard salvaged from Malcolm's years of teaching. Every morning at 9 sharp, they sat down Eleanor with her legal pad, Malcolm with his laptop, and planned. Step 1 venue. They found a charming, slightly run-down community theater on Bellamy Street. The owner, a widow in her 60s named Gloria, lit up when Eleanor walked in. "I know who you are," Gloria said with a hushed awe. "You played Chopin in Glen Ridge in '03. I was there." Eleanor smiled. "I'd like to play again, but for something bigger this time." Step 2 theme. They settled on a benefit concert proceeds going to fund music scholarships for underprivileged girls. The poster design was elegant, a black piano rising from a storm cloud, and the title in soft ivory lettering, The Black and White Symphony, One Woman's Song of Return. Step 3 exposure. This wasn't just about music, it was about message. Lily was the first to say yes. She met Eleanor at the edge of the schoolyard, out of breath from running. "I want to help," she said without waiting. "I want to speak about them, about what they did." "You'll be under a microscope," Eleanor warned. "They'll come at you." "I don't care. You protected me all my life. Let me do it back." Eleanor embraced her, the knot in her chest finally loosening, if only slightly. They scheduled a press interview with a local journalist who had been covering elder rights and financial abuse in families. Her name was Rachel Dominguez, and she arrived at the cottage with 2 recorders, a notepad, and more empathy than Eleanor expected. "I've heard your story, but I want to hear it from you," Rachel said gently. "No filters, just truth." And so Eleanor told it. The piano, the signatures, the surveillance, the escape. Then Lily spoke about how her parents had controlled visits, how they'd coached her on what to say, how she knew deep down that something was wrong all along. Rachel's article dropped 2 days later on the front page of the local Sunday section, under the title, "Silenced in Marble: How One Woman Fought Back with Music." It spread like wildfire. The media storm began quietly, a few shares on Facebook, a Twitter thread. But then came the radio interviews, the local news cameras parked outside the old theater, the school forums debating financial guardianship ethics. People started showing up, old students of Eleanor's, musicians, women who had faced similar quiet betrayals, and curious onlookers who just wanted to hear the lady who defied her family with a piano recital. Donations poured in, enough to cover the theater, enough to pay for a string quartet, enough for lighting programs, refreshments, and a photographer. Henry and Rebecca saw it, of course. Henry's silence cracked in the form of an email. "Mom, this is madness. You're dragging our family name through the mud. I urge you to reconsider before things escalate." Eleanor replied with a single sentence. "You should have thought of that before erasing mine." Rebecca's response was less composed. A cease and desist letter from her attorney threatening defamation suits and restraining orders. Eleanor handed it to Landon and Shear, who now represented her formally. "It's nothing but noise," Mr. Landon said after skimming the threats. "You're protected. And after what we file next week, they'll be the ones doing the explaining." As opening night neared, Eleanor's nerves hummed like a plucked violin string. She practiced for hours on Malcolm's out-of-tune Baldwin by day, and on the grand piano borrowed from a donor by night. Her hands, though slower than they once were, still danced with grace and purpose. The music she chose was intentional. Chopin for memory, Rachmaninoff for power, a new composition of her own Etude for Lily for truth, and a final improvisation unrehearsed titled Simply Free. The night before the concert, Eleanor stood alone on the stage of the Bellamy Theater, gazing into the rows of empty velvet seats. Her reflection in the glossy black of the Steinway's lid looked back at her older yes, but clearer, lighter. "Are you ready?" Malcolm asked from the wings. She turned. "No," she said, "but I'm coming anyway." The next morning, the article in the regional paper hit newsstands. Betrayed by Bloodline Reborn in Sound, the Eleanor Quinn story. It featured quotes from Lily, from Gloria the theater owner, even from a neighbor who once overheard an argument through the marble walls of Halston Ridge. But it ended with Eleanor's own words. "They built a cage and called it comfort. But music isn't meant to be locked away. And neither am I." The Bellamy Theater had never seen a crowd like this. An hour before the performance, the line already curved around the building, winding past lampposts and flower planters, stretching into the main square. Elderly couples holding hands, students in denim jackets with phone cameras, raised mothers with their daughters clutching folded programs. They came for music, but stayed for something deeper. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. The main hall, once a forgotten relic of a bygone arts era, now shimmered under fresh lights. Red velvet curtains, bronze sconces, a grand Steinway center stage polished to a mirror sheen. Malcolm Tate adjusted his tie in the wings, glancing out as seats filled to the rafters. He spotted faces he hadn't seen in decades. Former colleagues, local politicians, even a columnist from the state paper. Backstage, Eleanor Quinn sat in silence. She wore black, elegant, understated, but with a satin white sash around her waist. Her silver hair was pulled into a soft bun, her fingers resting gently on her lap. She stared at her reflection in the upright mirror. "You look like war," Malcolm said quietly from the doorway. She smiled. "Good." A theater volunteer tapped the door. "5 minutes, Miss Quinn." Eleanor stood and walked to reclaim everything. When she stepped on stage, the applause erupted like a tide breaking. She paused before the piano, not rushing, not smiling. She simply stood and looked at them, all of them. Eyes upon eyes, hundreds, every breath held. Then she sat down, closed her eyes, and began to play. The first notes drifted like fog. Gentle, familiar, the beginning of Chopin's Nocturne in E minor. But something in her touch made the piece feel new. Not mournful, but vigilant. wounded but not weak. The hall listened as if spellbound. Every note was deliberate, a confession and a call to arms. By the time she reached the final bar, several in the front row were already wiping their eyes. She let the last note linger, then stood. "I want to thank you," she said, her voice clear, unmiked, yet somehow reaching every corner. "Not just for coming, but for listening." She turned to face the audience fully. "I am not here tonight simply as a pianist, or a woman of a certain age, or even a grandmother. I am here as someone who was erased, quietly, methodically, and almost permanently." A murmur rippled through the crowd. For years I was made to believe that I was forgetful, frail, confused, that my thoughts were obsolete, that my signature could be overwritten, that my presence in my own life was negotiable. She reached into a folder placed atop the piano and held up a document. "This is the will I signed in 2017, notarized, filed, legal. It leaves my estate, my name, and my legacy to my granddaughter, Lily Quinn." Lily, seated in the second row, clutched the armrest, eyes brimming. Eleanor held up a second document. "This is the one they forged." A gasp. Same format, different contents, different signature, and forged not by strangers, but by my own family. Gasps became whispers. She gestured to the side of the stage. Malcolm stepped out carrying a laptop and speaker set. "And this," she said, "is their voice." She nodded to Malcolm. He pressed play. From the speakers came Rebecca's voice, unmistakable and cruel. "She won't even know it's not hers. By the time we file, she'll believe she signed it herself. Then Henry. We just need to make her look confused. The doctor can say she's been declining for months." Another wave of disbelief washed over the room. Faces turned, people whispered. Eleanor raised her hand, calming the room. "I was told I was a burden, an obstacle to the future, that my memories didn't matter. But let me ask you, what is a future built on the theft of someone else's past?" The silence now was complete. She walked to the edge of the stage. "I do not share this to humiliate them. I share it to survive them. Because silence does not protect the silenced, it buries them." She scanned the audience. Henry Quinn, Rebecca Quinn. Heads turned. All eyes followed. Henry shrank in his seat, white-knuckled, his face pale. Rebecca stood slowly, defiant at first. But then came the flashbulbs, the murmurs, the judgment that could no longer be denied. "You stole what was not yours," Eleanor said, "and tonight I am taking it back." A moment, a pause, then applause, soft at first, then louder, then thunderous. People stood, cheered, sobbed. Lily ran to the stage and embraced her. Malcolm, standing behind the piano, nodded with something like pride. The storm had broken, and Eleanor had played its overture. Outside, the theater lights glowed into the night. Local reporters gathered near the exit, filing early dispatches from their phones. Standing ovation for Justice Elder fraud exposed at city concert. Quinn family accused of legal forgery, victim strikes back in public reveal. One woman in her 60s stood on the sidewalk weeping quietly. "My daughter won't talk to me anymore," she told a journalist. "But this makes me feel seen." Back inside, Eleanor sat in the green room, sipping water, shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from release. Lily held her hand. "Was it enough?" the girl whispered. Eleanor squeezed her fingers. It was the truth. Behind them, Mr. Landon entered holding a phone. "You're trending statewide," he said. "And the DA's office has requested a meeting." Eleanor didn't flinch. "Good, let's give them the rest." The wind that swept through Halston Ridge that morning was colder than usual. It rattled the high windows of the estate like a warning, lifting the edges of the newspapers stacked at the front gate. One headline dominated every front page across the county: "Forged Legacy. Son of renowned pianist, under investigation." Henry Quinn stared at the words like they belonged to someone else. His name was there in black ink, attached to phrases like conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery of a legal document, and elder coercion. Photos accompanied the story, one of Eleanor at the concert, eyes resolute. Another of Henry and Rebecca in the audience, frozen mid-reaction. He sat at the kitchen island of a house that had grown too quiet. No morning blender, no echo of heels across the floor. Rebecca was gone. She'd left 2 nights after the concert, taking a red-eye flight to Cancun under her maiden name. No note, no apology, just a void. Now his phone buzzed again. It had been doing that for days, calls from attorneys, reporters, family, friends, suddenly remembering their schedules. But he didn't answer. He just stared at the screen numb, because deep down, beneath the shame and unraveling pride, he knew the truth. It was over. The court's decision came swiftly. A judge granted a protective injunction over all of Eleanor Quinn's estate, pending full investigation of the forged will and associated manipulation. Halston Ridge was ordered frozen, no transfers, no sales, no occupants. The locks were changed and the grounds placed under court-appointed supervision. Henry was summoned for questioning. His assets, bank accounts, stocks, trust holdings were flagged. As for Rebecca, a warrant was issued. The DA's office announced a full inquiry into familial financial abuse and elder coercion, citing the Quinn case as a watershed moment in generational justice. But Eleanor never celebrated. She didn't cheer or raise a glass. Instead, she went to the cottage window, watched the wind rattle the maple leaves, and quietly said to Malcolm, "Now let's do something good with what's left." They filed the paperwork within a week. A nonprofit. Name the Free Piano Foundation. Mission: to create musical education spaces for children from low-income families, especially girls with limited access to the arts. At the heart of it, the Free Piano Center, a community school housed in a repurposed chapel on the south side of town. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows shaped like treble clefs and stars. Where pews once sat, rows of keyboards now stood. The altar had become a recital stage. The center's motto etched above the door read, "Every note has a place." On the first morning of class, Eleanor arrived before dawn. She wore a cardigan the color of soft moss and carried a tote filled with sheet music pencils and peppermints. She unlocked the door herself, breathing in the faint scent of new carpet and old hope. Inside, Lily was already arranging chairs. She looked up and grinned. "You're early." Eleanor returned the smile. "I couldn't sleep." They worked together in silence for a few moments. Then Lily paused. "Grandma, why didn't you press charges, I mean real ones? You could have taken everything back." Eleanor straightened a music stand. "I didn't want everything back. I only wanted what was mine to give." "But you could have sued, for damages, for what they put you through." Eleanor turned her eyes soft. "Revenge is a song that ends flat. I wanted a legacy that ends in harmony." Lily nodded, tears rising but not falling. "I'm proud of you," Eleanor said gently. "I'm proud of you," Lily replied. By 10 o'clock the building buzzed with life. Children of all ages arrived, some in hand-me-down jackets, some in uniforms stitched with care. They stared wide-eyed at the instruments, the sheet music, the soft velvet curtain that lined the back wall. Eleanor met them at the door one by one. She knelt to greet a girl named Ava, whose mother worked 2 jobs and whose fingers trembled as she reached for a piano key. "Do you know what this is?" Eleanor asked, tapping middle C. Ava shook her head. "It's the start of your voice," Eleanor said. And from that moment the room came alive. Lessons began not with scales or structure, but with sound. Eleanor encouraged the children to press any key to listen, not just with ears, but with heart. "Feel the note," she told a shy boy named Elias. "Let it speak." Lily guided a trio of younger students through rhythm games using plastic cups and tapping sticks. Malcolm, though officially just the janitor, offered history lessons about composers who overcame their own struggles. Beethoven's deafness, Clara Schumann's battles, Scott Joplin's poverty. Within a week, students were composing their first pieces. Within a month, they were performing. One evening, Eleanor sat alone at the teacher's piano. The hall had emptied. The laughter and chatter of children still echoed faintly in the corners. She looked out at the rows of seats so different from Bellamy Theatre but no less sacred. She placed her hands on the keys and played, not for the stage, not for a courtroom, not even for memory, but for freedom. A local journalist visited a few days later. "Why call it the free piano?" she asked. Eleanor smiled. "Because no one should ever have to pay to be heard." As the seasons turned, the center grew. Donations came in from unexpected places: a retired judge, a famous violinist moved by Eleanor's story, a foundation once run by a rival school. Volunteers signed up, parents sent letters, and more than once strangers stopped Eleanor in the grocery store simply to say thank you. For fighting, for playing, for staying. She always answered the same way. I only stayed because someone needed the music. One Saturday afternoon, Eleanor found Lily sitting at the back of the classroom staring at a framed photo on the wall. It showed Eleanor as a young teacher seated beside a much younger Malcolm, both mid-laughter. "You were beautiful," Lily said. Eleanor sat beside her. "You are." Lily looked down. "Do you think they ever—" "My parents? Do you think they regret it?" Eleanor considered that. "I think regret's a quiet ghost. It visits when you're alone, and they're alone now." Lily didn't say anything for a long while. "Then I'm glad you chose light." Eleanor squeezed her hand. "You were my light." Outside, wind swept through the courtyard. It didn't sound like the storm that once haunted Halston Ridge. It sounded like breath, like song, like peace. The air had changed, not dramatically, not in a way you could name, but it had softened somehow, like the house itself had begun to exhale. The frantic energy of the legal battles, the whispers of scandal, the fevered notes of the concert, those had all drifted away like a storm that had finally crossed the hill. What remained was gentler, quieter. Eleanor Quinn now woke to birdsong and the smell of orange tea. Some mornings she lingered in bed longer than she used to, not because of weariness, but because there was no longer anything to outrun. No decisions pressed on her spine, no signatures dangled over her head. She had reclaimed her name. She could at long last simply be. At the edge of the room, sunlight filtered through lace curtains onto a neat stack of music books, a watering can, and a pair of walking shoes. Her days had taken on a cadence as rhythmic as any sonata, teaching in the mornings, errands in the afternoon, quiet reflection by evening. She taught with a light touch, now smiling more often, letting the children improvise without needing every note to fall in line. And always somewhere in the background there was Malcolm. He'd become a part of the routine without ceremony, not loud or insistent, just present. On Saturdays they went to the farmer's market. Eleanor wore her sun hat and carried a woven bag filled with fresh basil goat cheese and lavender honey. Malcolm strolled beside her, offering sarcastic commentary about overpriced peaches and kale fanatics. They greeted vendors like old friends. The flower lady, who now knew Eleanor's preferences by heart, always handed her the day's freshest white daisies without asking. Sometimes children from the music center would spot her and run over. Eleanor always knelt to hug them, ask about their scales, their practice, their pets. To outsiders, they looked like a retired couple enjoying late peace. But inside, Eleanor still wrestled with the oddness of it all. She hadn't planned for companionship at 73. She hadn't expected late-in-life beginnings, especially not after decades of cautious solitude. Malcolm wasn't Ben. Her late husband's memory still lived gently in her bones. But he was something unexpected: comfort without pressure, laughter without expectation. One April morning she found herself teaching under the jacaranda tree in the center's garden courtyard. Sunlight dappled the piano keys through violet blossoms. Children played scales while bees danced lazily among the flowers. Lily sat nearby organizing sheet music. "I like this version of you," she said. Eleanor glanced up. "This version, the one who smiles like the world doesn't owe her anything." Eleanor chuckled. "The world owes no one anything. That was always the lie." Lily paused. "Do you miss the stage?" "I think I miss the electricity of it, the sharpness. But I don't miss being the woman who played to be seen. I like being the woman who plays to connect." That evening, Eleanor returned to the cottage just before dusk. She hung her hat by the door and stepped into the kitchen to the scent of rosemary and baked garlic. Malcolm stood at the stove, humming off key, stirring a pot. "You've been spoiling me," she teased. He shrugged. "You're too thin. Teaching all those prodigies, you forget to eat." After dinner, they sat on the porch wrapped in blankets as the wind rustled the trees. He brought out a small box. She raised an eyebrow. "You're not proposing, are you?" He grinned. "If I were, it'd be over something fancier than tomato bisque." She opened the box. Inside was a hairpin delicate silver, shaped like a treble clef, a small sapphire set at the center. "It was my wife's," he said softly. "She used to wear it to concerts. I thought maybe it was time it heard music again." Eleanor stared at it, the breath catching in her chest. "Malcolm, I can't." "You can," he said. "You've already given it new purpose." She closed the lid gently. "Thank you." They sat in silence a moment longer, the sky deepening to indigo. Then he cleared his throat. "I'm heading to the coast this summer," he said. "The cottage in Ellenshire by the sea cliffs. Thought I'd spend a few weeks there, read, walk, maybe fall off a paddleboard." Eleanor laughed. "You should come with me." The invitation landed like a soft chord. Not dramatic, not desperate, just there. She looked out toward the garden where the moonlight was beginning to kiss the hydrangeas. "I don't know," she said. "I know," he replied. "It's a lot." "It's Lily," she admitted. "I feel like I just got her back, like we're still threading something together." "She's strong," he said gently, "and she's proud of you." Eleanor nodded. "I just don't want to miss anything." "You won't," he said. "Not if you go for the right reasons." She turned to him. "And what's the right reason?" "Because you're choosing it. Not escaping, not proving anything, just choosing joy." That night, Eleanor placed the hairpin on her nightstand and lay awake longer than usual. She thought of all the versions of herself: young Eleanor who played to please, married Eleanor who played to survive, silenced Eleanor who played in secret, and now this one, the one who had nothing to hide and everything still ahead. Outside wind rustled the hedges. Not a storm, just wind. The early morning air was laced with the scent of blooming lilac and pavement still wet from a spring rain. The city stirred slowly, shadows pulling back as light crawled up brick walls and rooftop chimneys. At the edge of a quiet street near the bus terminal, Eleanor Quinn stood at her window, watching the day wake up. Her suitcase was already packed. One soft carry-on with linen shirts, sandals, sheet music, and her favorite scarf. Nothing extravagant, just enough. Lily knocked gently and peeked into the room. "You ready?" she asked, offering a sleepy smile. Eleanor turned. "As I'll ever be." They embraced without words. A silence that spoke of new beginnings, not because of a rupture, but because of trust. After everything they'd endured together, this goodbye didn't feel like an end. It felt like a turning page. "I want you to promise me one thing," Eleanor whispered, brushing Lily's hair from her forehead. "Don't wait until you're 72 to live your own story." Lily smiled with tears dancing behind her lashes. "Only if you promise to live yours." The ride to the station was calm. Mr. Malcolm Tate was already there, leaning against a wooden bench with a folded newspaper tucked under his arm. He wore a light summer blazer and a linen cap, his eyes warm when he spotted them. A few of the children from the music center were already gathered near the platform, giggling with handmade cards in hand. One had drawn a piano with wings, another a smiling son playing a violin. Eleanor laughed when she saw them. "You little rascals! What are you all doing up at this hour?" "We came to send you off with music," Ava announced, proudly holding up a kazoo. "You're very brave," Eleanor teased. "Playing that instrument in public." Malcolm leaned in. "I told them it was tradition. Great musicians must be serenaded when they leave on great adventures." Eleanor turned to Lily, whose smile trembled with both pride and ache. "You sure you'll be all right while I'm gone?" Lily nodded. "We've got the summer schedule set. The foundation's safe, and the new volunteer instructors are lined up. But what about you?" Lily looked her square in the eye. "I've got this. You taught me how to stand tall." A pause. "Now go," Lily added. "It's time for you to stand free." The bus pulled up with a gentle hiss. The door folded open. Eleanor hesitated for a breath. Not out of fear, but reverence. She glanced back at the city, at the skyline she had both fought and forgiven, at the center that had become a lighthouse, at her granddaughter who stood like an anchor in the morning mist. She turned toward Malcolm. "You sure you're not just kidnapping an old woman for her scrambled egg recipe?" He smirked. "Only partly." They climbed aboard. The children waved. Lily blew a kiss. The engine hummed to life. As the bus pulled out onto the open road, Eleanor settled into her seat, watching the city fall away in fragments, buildings, intersections, storefronts that once held memories like ticking clocks. She didn't cry. She didn't cling. She breathed. Hours later, the bus curved along the coast cliffs, rising like giants against the shimmer of sea. Salt air pressed against the windows and gulls soared in the yawning sky. Malcolm leaned his head back, dozing softly. Eleanor opened her notebook. At the top of the page she wrote, "Movement I Liberation" in C major. She didn't know what the next composition would sound like. It didn't matter. It would be hers alone. Later that evening, the bus arrived in Ellenshire, a sleepy town stitched with cobblestone paths and ocean air. The sun hung low over the waves, golden and slow. Malcolm carried her bag, joking about how she'd packed an entire orchestra. The cottage was small-weathered, wrapped in ivy and laughter from summers long past. She stepped onto the porch, closing her eyes for a moment. The wind swept across her cheeks, cool, briny, familiar, and new all at once. And then, for the first time in years, Eleanor Quinn laughed from her belly. Not a polite chuckle, not the tight, rehearsed smile of someone surviving, but real full-bodied joy. A week later, Lily received a postcard. It was short. Dear Lily, I watch the tide roll in every morning with a cup of Earl Grey and my bare feet on the porch rail. I'm writing again, not music, not yet, but words. I've discovered I love words as much as notes. I miss you. But more importantly, I'm finding myself. I think that's what freedom really is, not absence, but presence. The ability to sit quietly and say, this is mine. Thank you for standing beside me when I couldn't stand for myself. I'll be back, but not before I've wandered a little. Love always. Grandma Eleanor. Lily read the postcard 3 times before slipping it into a photo frame on her dresser. And that night, while locking up the music center, she looked at the Etude for Lily plaque on the wall, smiled to herself and whispered, live your story, Grandma, I've got the rest. Final shot, the ocean, waves crashing gently along the shore. The camera pans to Eleanor sitting at an upright piano Malcolm had hauled onto the deck, wind catching the hem of her dress. Her fingers move slowly, no audience, no pressure, no fear. Just music, just peace. And as the screen fades to black, the final line appears in white script. At 72, she began a new life, one where she finally lived for herself.